A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thanks for joining us on the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Here's what's coming up on the world today. The trade wars are in full swing between the United States, Canada, China, and now Europe. Canada announcing retaliatory tariffs on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods. Ukraine agrees to a 30-day ceasefire following talks with U.S. officials in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. Plus, a new study shows the disadvantages of children drinking slushies. Let's begin the world today. Thanks again for joining us. Canada has announced retaliatory tariffs on more than $20 billion worth of U.S. goods following the U.S. president's 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum set to begin today. The new tariffs by Canada include steel products worth 12.6 billion Canadian dollars, as well as sports equipment, computers, and cast iron goods. A number of Canadian ministers have been responding to reporters' questions as to the extent of the tariffs and the impact. Minister of Finance and Intergovernmental Affairs, Dominic LeBlanc, said the government is taking steps to mitigate the impact of these countermeasures on Canadian workers and businesses, but that Canada will use every tool at its disposal to defend the country's jobs and Canadian businesses and support workers through the challenging times. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joy says initial tariffs were sparked by exaggerated claims about the border, and the latest excuse is national security. Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne says the tariffs on Canada is an attack on Americans. He says Canadian steel and aluminum are essential for North America and they fuel North American supply chains, but the tariffs are bringing the Wild West to factory floors. Well, earlier today, the European Union said it would impose countermeasures on $28.3 billion worth of U.S. goods in a strong but proportionate response. The new tariffs are in response to the imposition of new unjustified U.S. tariffs on EU steel and aluminum imports. The Commission's response, a carefully calibrated one, is based on a two-step approach. The Commission will allow the suspension of existing 2018 and 2020 countermeasures against the U.S. to lapse on April 1st. These countermeasures target a range of U.S. products that respond to the economic harm done on 8 billion euros of EU steel and aluminum exports. And then secondly, in response to the new U.S. tariffs affecting more than 18 billion euros of EU imports, the Commission is putting forward a package of new countermeasures on U.S. exports. They'll come into force by mid-April, following consultations of member states and stakeholders. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen claimed tariffs are taxes and are bad for business.
We deeply regret this measure. Tariffs are taxes. They are bad for business and worse for consumers. They are disrupting supply chains. They bring uncertainty for the economy. Jobs are at stake, prices up. Nobody needs that on both sides, neither in the European Union nor in the United States. The European Union must act to protect consumers and business. The countermeasures we take today are strong but proportionate. As the United States are applying tariffs worth $28 billion, we are responding with countermeasures worth 26 billion euros. This matches the economic scope of the tariffs of the United States. Our countermeasures will be introduced in two steps, starting with April 1st and fully in place as of April 13th. In the meantime, we will always remain open to negotiations.
Today's tariffs from the United States take us in a wrong direction, and the reason is manifold. The EU-US trade partnership is well-balanced and highly profitable for both sides. It's the biggest trade relationship in the world. On steel and aluminium particularly, we share some of the challenges, for instance, global overcapacities driven by non-market practices. And the EU here is clearly part of the solution, not the problem. Last month, during my visit to Washington to raise these points, it was indeed clear that the EU is not the problem, making today's measures even more unjustified.
This now is Foreign Affairs commentator Collins Wege. He joins us from Brussels in Belgium. Collins, thank you for joining us on the program. And I'm sure that you have been inundated by, some of these stories about the tariffs that are imposed, and you're watching the news and you're seeing the U.S. imposing trade tariffs on Canada, on Mexico, and China, and now he's focused on Europe. What do you make of what is going on?
First and foremost, thank you for having me, Amarachi. Well, this obviously has not come to anyone as a surprise because, in his campaign to return to the White House, Donald Trump, did say that he's going to do exactly what he's doing now. But also, he left us with some indications during his first comment that, he is a guy that will actually focus not on bilateralism, but more on reciprocity. And so, when he feels that, America is doing more than others, he would want to, put up tariff, for instance, as one of his tools of furthering his, policy around reciprocity. And that is exactly what is playing out now. Now, it could very well be, and in fact, there are very strong indications that he hasn't quite thought this through. Because for a start, there is no way in the world he will assume correctly that, Europe is not going to retaliate, or any of those other countries. And so he hasn't quite thought very deeply about what this is going to do to to the markets, to the U.S. economy. And so ultimately, what we're seeing here is an eye for an eye that leaves everybody blind. And we'll just wait and see how it all plays out.
Yes, and the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said tariffs are taxes, they're bad for business. The other official who spoke after her said that this really hurts the relationship between the EU and the US, which is the largest trade relationship that exists in the world. Why do you think that Trump is going after his European allies?
For a start, we know that Trump has been very, very unhappy with the arrangements around NATO. That's number one. And yes, he wants that, rejigged. Trump is someone also that doesn't quite, go directly in some of these things. Sometimes he tries to find, some sort of back door to approach, what he wants to achieve. Take, for instance, his justification for the higher tariff in Canada is the fact that he said that the border has been left quite open and illicit drugs are flowing in, whereas in reality, Canada has done quite a lot to stem the flow of drugs, but he had to find a reason. So in the case of Trump and Europe, I believe that NATO is one of it. Secondly, the war in Ukraine, we see how he's been cozying up to Putin of Russia. And so he's trying to use some of these tariffs as a way, most likely, most probably, to get them to the negotiating table to begin to indeed talk about those things that he finds very important. But we should not make any mistake about the fact that he definitely wants to see some of those, tariffs actually go through. But I think there are reasons to also believe that this is more of a strategy than a real intention to disrupt the market that will affect the United States economy in the manner that it will do.
It almost sounds like you're saying that Trump is fighting Russia's war secretly by imposing these tariffs on Europe. But why steel and aluminum? Is it because these are the biggest imports from the United States into Europe?
Well, yes, steel is very, very important. Let's let's also remember that Europe they support the automotive industry of the United States of America very, very strongly, and the United States definitely wants to really hit Europe where it hurts the most, and still is big, because of car manufacturing. Countries like Germany, for instance, are going to be hard hit on that. And so, assuming, and this is real assumption, that the reason he's doing this is, more strategic than the real intention to see it through. I think he's using steel as a means of essentially heightening his, or strengthening his negotiating power, so that ultimately, when they come to the table, he will have more cards to pull out.
It is an interesting perspective. Really, it is. Because all I'm seeing here is the advantage that this has for Russia. Now, let's take a guess at what the Russian President Vladimir Putin is thinking about all of this. How do you think this indirectly appeases to Russia and works to their advantage?
Well, Russia obviously has, some scores to settle with Europe. That is very much obvious, because he actually believes, for many reasons, that the war he is prosecuting against, Ukraine, that actually this is a war with Europe, because Europe, according to him, is fighting the proxy war. Now, let's also remember that Russian assets have been seized by Europe, not to even go into, the constructions around the financial flow and all of that. So yes, there are very many scores to settle, and it does look like Trump is actually desirous to, help Russia in winning this war, and so indirectly, he is actually punishing Europe to do Russia a favor, but the extent to which he's going to see this through, honestly, is doubtful. I mean, one can't imagine that an American president would want to, sever the, transatlantic ties that have been there over centuries. And so it is doubtful that he will see this through, but the signs are not looking good. But on the other hand, it's helping Europe to look more inwards, get stronger. Take United Kingdom, for instance. I mean, post-Brexit, what is playing out now has actually, brought Europe and UK much closer than ever before, and that is because they are all collapsing together to be able to, to form the partnership to be able to withstand the American, I would say, attack or war against them.
Yeah, and Europe has imposed a number of sanctions. I think about 7 major sanctions on Russia because of the war in Ukraine. But you touched briefly on something, and that is the US-EU partnership that I'm thinking this might be the beginning of the end to. But we have seen Trump in the last 1 week change his mind on these tariffs, the tariffs on Canada that were suspended and then reimposed because Canada insisted it was not going to remove its own tariffs until they're sure exactly what Trump is doing. Do you think he might change his mind regarding these tariffs imposed against the EU? And do you think the EU would also back down and probably suspend the imposition of these tariffs, which begin on April 1st?
There are signs that EU has left room for United States of America to have a rethink. Let's not forget that, when the announcement of the retaliatory announcement was made, the EU has indicated that it's going to be in 2 phases, in 2 batches, more or less, whereby from 1st of, April, the first will kick in, And then the second half will kick in during the second half of April. Now, they have studied Trump very carefully, and they have known that just like the case of Canada, he has this penchant for making the big announcement and then equally follow up with a second announcement to say we are, putting it on hold to review it or whatever, and then nobody talks about it anymore. And I want to believe that it was for that reason that the EU gave that room for Trump to have a rating. But of course, if they do not have guarantees and Trump really wants to see this through, Europe is serious about the retaliatory measures, about 7 of it that they have pushed forward.
And how do people prepare, for the eventuality of these tariffs taking place? Because I'm seeing that the tariffs would affect products such as industrial and agricultural products, steel, aluminum, textiles, home appliances, plastics, poultry, beef, eggs, dairy, sugar, and vegetables. You're talking about the common man here, people who, these are products you regularly pick from the grocery store. How would that trickle down to everyday living in Europe, knowing that some of these products you're used to may not be on the shelves anymore as soon as these tariffs kick in?
They will be in the store, but they will be at higher prices because obviously they've got to source them from elsewhere. And, those that, remain adamant on importing from the country where the higher tariff has been placed will definitely have to cover their costs. And who pays that cost? It is the Americans or the Europeans, as the case may be. And so ultimately, yes, prices are going to go high. And that is why it is not a surprise that when asked if, recession is foreseen in the coming days, Trump didn't give a clear answer. His trade minister, Secretary of Trade, actually tried to play it down to say, yes, it's going to be, bad before it begins to get better. This is because they have seen this, they see this happening. And all across, the United States of America, the Trump base are actually holding down, their representatives in the, in the Senate House of Reps because they are unhappy about, what is happening, what they are hearing. So it is definitely not going to be without a repercussion on both sides. And in trade wars, no one wins.
Say no one wins. Collins, thank you again for joining us on the program today.
Always my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Let's segue into Canada. The U.S. president has done an about turn, halting a plan to double tariffs on Canadian steel and metal imports to 50%. The plan was supposed to take effect from today. However, tariffs on 25% still go ahead, and they'll be still be taking effect today. The move by the U.S. president comes out of the Canadian province of Ontario suspended new charges of 25% on electricity that sent it to some northern states in the U.S. just hours after Trump threatened to sharply increase his tariffs on the country. It marked the latest skirmish in a trade war that risks economic damage to the two North American neighbors. Canada, one of America's closest trade partners, has borne the brunt of Trump's ire as he's launched trade battles in his first months in office. Canada is also facing 25% tariffs on its steel and aluminum, which are set to go into effect today after Trump said he was ending exemptions to the duties previously granted to some countries. Canada has called Trump's attacks unjustified and announced retaliation, including new tariffs on 30 billion Canadian dollars of U.S. products. And what has the U.S. president been doing amidst all the trade war? Well, he's been trying to purchase a Tesla. He was making the comments about purchasing a Tesla alongside company boss and Doge director Elon Musk at the White House. Tesla slumped Tesla stock slumped by over 15% earlier, with Trump blaming constant attacks from the radical left, although other commentators blamed falling sales and the administration's economic policies such as tariffs. Musk is also overseeing Trump's waste drive for the Department of Government Efficiency. He sparked anger and protests among federal workers.
I'm going to buy because, number one, it's a great product, as good as it gets. And number two, because this man has devoted his energy and his life to doing this. And I think he's been treated very unfairly by a very small group of people. And I just want people to know that you can't be penalized for being a patriot. And he's a great patriot. And he's also done an incredible job with Tesla. And I mean, nobody else has a car company started up in the last 30 years that's been successful. I don't think so. And not only successful, but super successful. And because he's able to find billions and billions and billions of dollars of fraud and waste and all of the things, I mean, our country is going to be very strong very soon because of a lot of the things that he's done and a lot of the things that I'm doing. And there's no better team, but there's no better for what we're doing. There's nobody like this, and he shouldn't be penalized. And when I watched the other day, I said, I can't believe it. It should be the opposite. People should be going wild, and they love the product, but because he's finding all sorts of terrible things that have taken place against our country, they want to penalize him in an economic sense. And I just think that's very unfair. So I just wanted to make a statement. I'm going to buy one. Now, here's the bad news. I'm not allowed to drive because I haven't driven a car in a long time, and I love to drive cars. But I'm going to have it at the White House, and I'm going to let my staff use it. I'm going to let people at the place use it. And they all are all excited about that. I'm not allowed to use it. Can you believe it?
Welcome back to the world today. The White House has been responding to the responses on trade tariffs, saying that they are necessary for national security. U.S. President Donald Trump claims the demand from domestic producers has been depressed because of foreign competition. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says tariffs are not there to punish other countries, but steel and aluminum are national security concerns for the U.S. Speaking to reporters at an airport in Ireland, he said President Trump introduced tariffs because he wants to develop a domestic capability. According to him, if you don't have steel and aluminum, you can't build warships, you can't build airplanes. He says a lot of unfair trade practices, a lot of countries out there who subsidize their industries so that they can gain global market share. That's why you can't produce aluminum, and that really threatens our national security in the long term. Previous U.S. trade policy left the U.S. vulnerable, according to Rubio, claiming that any sort of interruptions in global supplies or it being used to extort the United States. Checking in on China, that's another country on the receiving end of Trump's tariffs. The country on Monday, however, began imposing tariffs on many farm products from the United States, for which China is the largest overseas market. It's the latest escalation of a trade fight between the world's two largest economies. The Chinese government announced the tariffs last week, shortly after President Trump raised tariffs on Chinese products for the second time since he took office in January. The Chinese tariffs will include a levy of 15% on U.S. products like chicken, wheat, and corn, as well as 10% on products like soybeans, pork, beef, and fruit. Beijing said the goods had already been shipped before Monday and imported by April 12 will not be subject to the new tariffs because crops like soybeans, wheat, and corn in particular tend to travel by sea. And this means that China's customs officials will actually collect few tariffs until shipments arrive in China after leaving the United States on Monday or later. A spokesperson for the National People's Congress, which is now holding China's annual legislative session, said last week that Trump's latest tariffs had disrupted the security and stability of the global industrial and supply chains. The Chinese government also said it is blocking 15 U.S. companies from buying Chinese products unless it granted special permission, including a manufacturer of drones that supplies the U.S. military, and it said it was blocking 10 other U.S. companies from doing business in China. Joining us now is author, political and international relations analyst Dele Ogun. He joins us from London. Dele, great to have you here on the program. I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on Trump's tariffs on Europe. It will also affect the UK. UK steel imports will be affected by 25% levy, but the Prime Minister says the UK will keep all options on the table. Is the Prime Minister dragging his feet on a proper response to the US?
Well, you know, it's the language of diplomacy, isn't it? That you keep all cards on the table while you're thinking through what your response should be. The reality is this: we've moved into a completely new era. We were in the era of globalization, the drive to one world, open borders, open no trade barriers, and ironically, it's actually the European Union that have set this thing off. The European Union stroke NATO, because what happened? Remember the embargoes and the sanctions that were imposed on Russia as part of this war effort, and you can imagine Trump sitting there and observing this thing for the last 3 years before he took office. And as Rubio said, that this is a national security concern, that they've suddenly realized that to be exposed, to be in a situation where you are, your steel production, your aluminium production, you're dependent upon others, it seems to me, apart from the financial aspect of it in terms of boosting employment opportunities for Americans, there is generally a national security dimension, which is that you're not going to leave your country. No one's going to leave their countries to be exposed where you're exposed to sanctions and embargoes from others that you're dependent upon. So there's that aspect. And so Keir Starmer is simply choosing his words carefully. I'm not sure that there's that much he can do in response. This is the altered reality. It's the new game. Whereas before, as I said, it was all open borders. We're all one big happy family. Everybody rely on everybody else for whatever they needed. Some of the economic warfare that was part of this Ukraine war has caused everybody to think very carefully about what they're importing and what they're exporting.
I think this is a really interesting aspect you bring to this conversation, because I'm not sure that Europe ever thought that it would be affected so much by, or threatened, its trade would be threatened so much by another existing power as the United States. When it was imposing all of those sanctions, it thought that it was enough, it was fortified enough to be able to withstand any shake to its economies. But you know, with the Trump tariffs, it almost seems like if they're not careful, everything could fall apart.
Oh yes, I mean it's interesting that they're all screaming right now in terms of the pain that it's going to cause. But as I said, look at it in context. If you see what the embargoes and the bans on importation from Russia, you can imagine the impact on the Russian economy. So the whole world is now moving in that direction. I'm foreseeing major economic crisis in the years. In the coming years, there's bound to be a global recession because everybody's putting the shutters up. And yes, the European Union and NATO were lulled into a sense of complacency, whereby they looked at their team, which included America. They never foresee. They should have foreseen what Trump was going to do, because he was very clear that he was anti this one. In fairness to them, they tried everything possible, including what Trump and Musk complain of, that to the extent of interference with the US elections to try and stop Trump. So they saw the train coming, but they couldn't stop it. He's now there and he's bringing these measures, and he's made it very clear that it's America first. It's everybody dependent on themselves now. This is the new formula. And you only trade what you have to trade, what you can't do for yourself. There's a lot of production capacity in America, And there's a lot of oversupply of steel. And he's responding to that to say, I'm going to look after the American market.
So there's a new world order, the new economic world order that we're seeing. What do you think this means for Africa, though? I know he hasn't said anything yet about trade tariffs imposed in Africa, but I feel that it is coming. If he's already attacking China, Canada, I mean, it doesn't seem like anyone is being spared from Trump's wrath.
Well, I think Africa may get away with it because what do we export? We're not in the steel production game. If it's Nigeria, we have a power situation. So it's really those markets, those ones who are seeing America as a market for their goods that are exposed. We're not in that game, which is tragic. What it means is that prices for us are likely to climb if there's a sort of a knock-on effect in our direction. But I don't think we're the targets. We just got to adjust to the new world order that we are the most exposed. We Africans are the most exposed because we're importing everything. And it's time for our governments to start appreciating the level of exposure that we are carrying at the moment.
Yeah, because this might not be, I mean, we might not feel the backlash from the US, but for the UK, for European countries that we trade with, if the cost of production goes up in those countries, we also bear the brunt of that. Countries are already struggling economically because of the performance of their currencies on the foreign exchange markets and all of that. So what is the solution right now for a country like Nigeria that's already struggling economically? I know that cost of living is already higher than usual here in this country. How much worse can it get with what's going on globally?
Well, as I said, recession is a real possibility on a global level. From what I'm seeing, we're into an era of trade wars. We've moved away from globalization. This is the end of the drive towards globalization. In terms of its impact upon us, as I said, we are very much import dependent. We're not an export. It's only raw materials that we export. But if there is a recession, then of course that would impact the revenues that we're able to bring in from the oil and gas exports. That's where the impact will come in our direction. But apart from that, the others are going to be desperate for new markets, and such that they will, if America shuts its market, they've got to sniff around to say where else can we ship our oversupply of steel. And with the weak governance structures that we have, I can't trust our governments to do what is necessary in the interests of our people. I simply can't.
How concerned should we be by the fact that the US and China are nowhere near being friends economically right now because of the imposition of sanctions? They're the two largest economies in the world. And I remember that, in the Trump administration, when he was 45th president, this was a country that he had tried to develop a relationship with. He did meet with President Xi Jinping. They had that wonderful meeting. I think that was in Vietnam, or maybe I'm confusing him with Kim Jong-un, the North Korean leader. But Trump did try to maintain closer ties with China. I mean, he had talked China up to the point where, the world thought definitely there could be a war between the two, and then everything was doused with that meeting that he held with Xi Jinping. Why impose tariffs now? It seems like he's turning around now on China. And China really isn't backing down, and they said they will meet the US with whatever powers they decide to come on with.
Well, the ones that you see, when you have a tariff war, you've got to, people say that he hasn't thought it through, he has. When you're imposing tariffs, what you have to think through is how reliant upon those products are you? If your people have no alternative, but to continue importing, that's where the inflationary impact comes from, because the tariffs raise the prices. But the idea is to choke off the demand for those imported products. Now, countries like China and countries like America, huge markets by themselves, that really don't need anybody else. At a critical level. The external markets is where their super profits come from, but they're large enough markets by themselves. So they'll be okay. China will be okay. America will be okay. It's the ones that are not, they haven't got the market. Countries like Britain. Britain is very much an export-orientated economy because the population mass is just not there. Likewise, other countries in Europe, they're looking for export markets. If they've shut off Russia, if America is closing its doors with its own tariffs, if China is going to join the game and impose tariffs as well, then there's going to be a lot of pain going around, is what I foresee.
You think that Trump could change his mind? I mean, we've seen him do that in the last 2 weeks. And then with Canada, he did suspend those tariffs and then now reimpose them. And then Canada also responding. Is he such a reliable partner right now?
No, I mean, if it depends how people take his messaging. One thing he's clear about is that he's here for Americans and is America first. If you are still looking to Trump's America as a partner, whether economically or militarily, it's you that's got the problem. He couldn't be clearer as to what his agenda is. He hates this internationalism, this globalism. His complaint, his gripe with the previous Democratic administrations is that they were internationalists and they allowed America to be dragged in all sorts of directions, whether it's in terms of the Middle East or in terms of the Ukraine war. America was being pulled all over the place. He's now saying, including to those who claim to have a special relationship, he's saying, forget that. I'm here for Americans. I'm here for America. And so to the extent that you're looking to us as a partner to carry your weight and carry your load, it's not going to happen. Everybody's now on their own. That's what he's saying.
Well, we'll see. Never a dull moment with the Trump presidency. Thank you again, Dilly, for joining us on the program.
It's a pleasure.
So other stories, but still in the U.S. The Agency for International Development, USAID, has been told, many of the staff have been told to shred and burn classified documents and personnel files. The requests raised alarm among employees and labor groups amid the ongoing dismantling of the agency. Acting Executive Secretary Erica Carr sent an email that thanked staff for carrying out classified safes and personnel documents from a Washington, D.C. office and told them to meet in the building's lobby for an all-day disposal event on Tuesday. The email read, shred as many documents first and reserve the burn bags for when the shredder becomes available or need a break. Typically, documents placed in burn bags for disposal are sealed and then taken to a secure site for incineration. The email asked staff not to overfill the burn bags and label them with the words secret and USAID B/10, which stands for Bureau or Independent Office, using permanent markers. The U.S. State Department did not and has not commented on the issue. It's not clear, however, if the agency had preserved copies of the documents marked for destruction. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it's ready to accept an immediate 30-day ceasefire with Russia proposed by the U.S. after a day of talks in Saudi Arabia. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he would present the offer to Russia, and the ball is now in their court. Moscow is yet to publicly comment on the issue, but Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says it's now up to the U.S. to convince Russia to agree to the positive proposal. Tuesday's talks in Jeddah were the first official meeting between the two countries since the extraordinary clash between Zelensky and U.S. President Donald Trump in the Oval Office on February 28th. In a joint statement, the U.S. also said it would immediately restart intelligence sharing and security assistance to Ukraine, which Washington had suspended after the unprecedented public row at the White House. Both delegations agreed to name their negotiating teams and immediately begin negotiations towards an ending and enduring peace that provides for Ukraine's long-term security. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking, according to Rubio. And if Russia rejects the offer, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. Marco Rubio's words. Welcome back. We're staying in Russia and the Ukraine war. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow will not accept any NATO troops under the guise in Ukraine. During an interview with journalists Mario Nofol, Larry Johnson, and Andrew Napolitano, France and the UK saying they would be willing to send peacekeeping troops in the event a deal is struck between Russia and Ukraine. But Lavrov says Moscow's position with regards to resolution of the crisis in Ukraine remains the same. He also spoke about the Middle East conflict, saying President Putin is always underlining when he speaks about this region that the solution is possible without Palestinian state and without a reliable security arrangement for Israel. The two states were created by the decision of the General Assembly in 1948. So an update on other stories now. The owner of the Solong cargo ship has confirmed the captain has been arrested after collision with a tanker in the North Sea is a Russian official. Humberside police said the 59-year-old man remained in custody after being arrested on suspicion of gross negligence and manslaughter. The Portuguese-flagged Solong and the US-registered tanker Senna Immaculate crashed off the East Yorkshire coast on Monday morning. A missing crew member from the cargo ship is presumed dead after a search and rescue operation was called off late Monday. Humberside police said it had begun a criminal investigation into the cause of the collision and is working with Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. Greenland's centre-right opposition has won a surprise general election victory in a vote dominated by independents and US President Donald Trump's pledge to take over this semi-autonomous region. The centre-right Democratic Party, which favours a gradual approach to independence from Denmark, achieved around 30% of the vote. Near-complete results show the party leader, Jan Frederik Nielsen, says Greenland needs the US to stand together in a time of great interest from outside. His party will now have to negotiate with other parties in order to form a coalition. Greenland is the world's biggest island between the Arctic and Atlantic Oceans. It's been controlled by Denmark, which is nearly 3,000 kilometers away, for about 300 years. At least 100 passengers have been freed after armed militants in Pakistan's Balochistan region attacked a train carrying more than 400 passengers. On Tuesday, the Baloch Liberation Army fired at the Jafar Express train as it traveled from Quetta to Peshawar, taking a number of passengers hostage. The separatist group said it had bombed the track before storming the train in the remote Sibi districts, claiming the train was under its control. As of this morning, local media reports that at least 16 militants have been killed, and among the hostages released are 17 injured passengers who have been hospitalized. Health advice coming from doctors in the UK says children should completely avoid ice drinks called slushy because it contains glycerol that can make them very ill. The researchers say they should avoid this drink at least until they're 8 years of age. The researchers studied the cases of 21 2 to 7-year-olds in the UK and in Ireland who needed emergency treatment soon after drinking a slushy product. The brightly colored drinks are designed to appeal to children, but most contain the naturally occurring sweetener glycerol instead of sugar to stop them freezing solid and give them the slushy effect. Current Food Standards Agency advice under 5s should avoid the drinks and under 11s should have no more than one. The advice is due to concerns that if a young child drinks a slushy too quickly, Glycerol intoxication could cause shock, hypoglycemia, and loss of consciousness. NASA and SpaceX will be launching a Crew 10 mission from Kennedy Space Center to replace the stranded crew of the infamous Boeing Starliner. The stranded crew should be able to return to Earth in days with the imminent arrival to space of the replacement mission at the International Space Station. The replacement crew are 4 spacefarers who are part of a SpaceX mission known as Crew 10, who will conduct research, technology demonstrations, and maintenance aboard the orbiting laboratory. Among those leaving space, coming back to Earth, are astronauts Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore, whose planned 10-day mission in June 2024 was extended for 9 months due to technical issues with the Boeing Starliner. And as we end the program, the magical northern lights light up the skies over Russia's Tver region in the night. There it is. The beautiful display shows a distinctive green and purple colors shimmering. According to experts, strong magnetic storms were recorded on the night of Saturday into Sunday, increasing the likelihood of the aurora borealis appearing. The aurora borealis is a phenomenon in the upper layers of the Earth's atmosphere that occurs during periods of geomagnetic activity, which can last from tens of minutes to several days. Someday we'll get to see that live. Thanks for watching The World Today. I'm Amarachi Ubani.